Hello, and welcome to the Pit Pony podcast with myself, Sharon Corley,
and me, Sarah Dunwood,
in which we talk to teachers from all walks of life who exited the classroom from what they thought was a job for life and thrived on the other side of teaching. Coming up in this episode...
So for me to be like that, I now cannot put myself back in that state of mind because it's so foreign to me. So to actually get to that point where I was almost broken and I just thought, I've forgotten who I am.
Hello, and welcome to an episode of the Pit Pony podcast with Hollie Jones, who Sarah and I know really, really well. We've known her for years. She's been a true friend involved with Connexus. So we go back pre-COVID. So well thought of by myself and Sarah, and so very grateful for her joining us today. Now, Hollie, teaching was not the first plan with Hollie, because at Careers Day, it was a big no at university for teaching. But she's one of those pit ponies who worked her way in through the back door, working initially in a children's nursery and then liked it, so applied for a B.Ed in the August, with her first lecture being in the September. But we will come on to that nature of Hollie's brain. Qualified in 2008 as a primary school teacher and did a tour of duty of 9 schools, including 4 in Hong Kong over a 3-year period, then Australia for a year. Then on relocating to England, she goes back into mainstream primary in a school. And something happened that made Hollie decide that she was not returning to the classroom as a teacher ever again. So welcome, Hollie Jones. And can you tell us, what is it you do now?
So now I work for the local council's educational psychology service as a neurodiversity practitioner. So going around schools and helping them adapt the environments for children, mainly with autism, ADHD, but we're going to branch out into other sort of types of neurodivergence as well. And trying to start my own business advocating for neurodivergent educators, staff, support staff and all that, just to make sure that they're looked after as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Hollie. So as we do with all of our guests, we want to take you back to that period of time where you were exiting, the circumstances under where you were exiting, what was happening in that school at that time. Okay. Well, over to you, Hollie.
It's so hard to bring it back to mind because my life is so different now. And it's not even been that long. So officially, my last sort of contract as a teacher ended in January 2024. I think what year it is now. But my last day in the classroom was in October 23 because I ended up signed off. So the last day, it's difficult to say the last day really, because I had a last day teaching on the Friday and then I'd gone in on the Monday, but left before the children even came in. So it's difficult to know which one is my last day.
What was the build-up surrounding that decision to go, Hollie? What had happened since you started at that school?
I'd worked at that school before I moved abroad, and then that was the first school I went to. Well, yeah, I suppose when I moved back from abroad, it was the first school I went to. I then moved around a couple of other different schools on temporary contracts and then ended up back at this one. A sort of change of leadership and everything. And I'd already been waiting for an ADHD assessment for probably about 18 months when I started the job. So I was very open about it. And then in the June of my first year there, so you're talking like 6 months in, I got a phone call to say, we've actually got a cancellation for an ADHD assessment next week. Do you want it? And so obviously I was like, yes, please. So it was getting on for 2 years then that I've been waiting. So had to take some time off, do the appointment, and then got back in the next day and said, yeah, I'm diagnosed. So they're going to start me on medication. And that's when everything changed. the attitude of some people around me. I mean, you're always going to get that anyway with neurodivergence of people saying, oh, everyone's a little bit autistic, everyone's a little bit ADHD, which isn't true. But it was the medication, I think, that made me realise how overwhelming my environment was. Because the medication for ADHD, well, the medication I take, not for everybody, but adults particularly, it's an amphetamine. Because ADHD is it's not a great name for it, really. There's no problem paying attention for someone who has ADHD. You can pay attention, you can hyper-focus on something for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours without going for a wee, having a drink, having anything to eat. And it's more about dopamine deficiency. So it's more about lower levels of dopamine in your brain. So your brain is constantly trying to find stimulation, constantly trying to find something to help you focus. So I take an amphetamine in the morning, at the pharmacy, they have to go and get it out of the controlled drugs cupboard and that, to stimulate my brain so that I can then focus on one thing at a time from the beginning to completion. So it kind of seems like as a teacher, you're spinning plates all the time and you're always getting a little bit of that done, a little bit of that done, a little bit of behaviour, a little bit of marking, this. Almost lends itself to ADHD. But to actually get anything completed and to feel like you're actually focusing on something, the medication really helps. So once I was on the medication in the classroom, it was like end of June that I was taking it. It was kind of like, I had like quite a small class at that point. So we were kind of having a laugh. It was year 5. So there's no sort of like pressure or like handover transition or anything. So had a really, really nice time. But it was when I went back in the September with a new class, they'd already upped my medication. And it was a completely different sensory experience to what I was used to. So it was almost like I had to teach, or I had to learn how to teach with my new brain. And it was way more difficult than I thought it was going to be. So if you're thinking you're used to spinning plates and, dashing around, you know what it's like. And then suddenly your brain is saying, right, start this, get it finished, and then we'll move on. And it's just not something I was used to. So it was really, really helpful in terms of being a mum, getting things done, sorting out the house and that sort of thing. And I felt like I was a lot more efficient at work, but I could do one thing at a time. And when I was doing that one thing, I needed to finish it, which is just not me at all. So what was stopping me from doing that was the environment around me. I found it really, really overwhelming. And I think before that, I was living on the teetering of anxiety all the time. So I was overwhelmed, but it was almost helping me to keep going. Whereas then as soon as you took that kind of like scatterbrainness away, it was like, actually, this environment's really overstimulated for me and I need to do something about this. And it's when I asked for that it just showed that it wasn't understood. And it was like I was asking for the world. And it just became a place where I wasn't mentally safe to be. It wasn't a psychologically safe place to be for me anymore. And I couldn't go in.
Wow. And I mean, can I just say that's probably given so much clarity in many respects to moving through how you've operated before to once you are taking medication. Because I think in some respects, there must have been like a titration period of settling in and getting used to this. But how qualify for me, what were some of the reasonable adjustments you were asking for in the first instance?
So the main things for me was, in general, the lighting, the strip lights in the classroom and the screens. So even now, rather than having like a blue light, I prefer a yellow light. Otherwise, I'll get headaches or it almost makes me feel a little bit dizzy. So I was like, I need some kind of, I'm not expecting you to change the lights, but I need some kind of cover. And I'd found all these different ways that you could do it for like hardly any money. And I need covers for the screens. and I need to be able to change the interactive whiteboard screen to a different colour. That was the sort of ongoing bit. And then there was a Friday morning pinch point where there was a lot of things that needed doing at the same time. And often for a neurodivergent brain, everybody's different. But for me, if that job needs doing on a Friday morning, my brain cannot conceive that maybe I should do that on a Thursday before I leave. So whenever I would leave, I've got to get the children, I've got to get this, I've got to nip to there, I've got to cook tea and all that. So on Thursday, I'm in Thursday mode. I get in on Friday, I'm doing the Friday jobs then. So you got to choose. There were all these different admin tasks. And what I wanted was a place to go that was quiet and the lighting was right, while the children were working independently anyway, while the TA kind of oversaw the guided reading that they were doing. And I could just go just for half an hour and get all this stuff done, bing, bang, bosh. Whereas when I was in the classroom, it was so overwhelming that it was taking me ages. And I knew I could do it. I just need to do that somewhere else. That's all I asked for.
And I think it's important to really drill into this. Because before we talk about reasonable adjustments, that kind of thing, let me just ask what it was, because I know the answer to this, my friend, and I really want you to walk through what it was you had to go out of this classroom and do. What was this admin task?
So on a Friday morning, as with schools everywhere, there's like a celebration assembly. So that would normally be at about 10 or whatever. So the expectation was that the children would be doing a guided read that was Bible-based, because it was a Catholic school. And it was for them to do independently. So they've got their reading, they've got the questions on the board, and they know exactly what they need to do if they finish. And that would give me room to then do those tasks without much supervision or teaching or anything, which is, that's absolutely fine. Obviously, having new year fives in, you almost have to train them a little bit to do that and figure things out for themselves, and that's all fine. And they weren't the easiest class, but they were a beautiful, lovely, fizzy class, and we all got on really well. But on a Friday morning, I was expected to, and I've written it down, so take the register and do the lunches of what they were having. That's fine. That was every morning. I'd have to gather up all of the reading journals in and write a comment on it, check if they'd read 5 times, check if a parent had signed it. If they had, they got a green card, so I had to write them down for a green card. I'd have to give them a raffle ticket that went in the little raffle ticket box to be drawn out later for the reading raffle, and stick one in their book. We had a cafe card, so that every time they read 5 times, they would be able to go into the raffle. They'd be able to go to the cafe and have a hot chocolate and read and that. And then I had to have a look at all the green cards of everyone who had green cards over the week, add them all up. If they'd got to a certain point, like, gold, bronze or whatever, I had to go and get a certificate for them, fill that out. I had to choose 2 children for the good news certificates. And then I would have to write down on our sort of communication system with parents, write a list of those children who had read 5 times that week who were in the raffle, and then say, thank you for your support with reading and that, send that. And all the while, the children are in the classroom, they're working as independently as they're able to, but it's difficult. It's just like, he's looking at me and all that. Sort of doing that. I had a TA, but she was having to do a dyslexia screening with a child, so she was off doing that. And then I've got the sort of executive head coming in saying, have you got your certificates yet? Have you got your certificates? And I was always, you will get, when they are done, I will send a child down with them. You don't need them until you're literally about to read it out, so you don't need to come and keep doing this. So there was all that for 30 31 children, because one of them would go over to the hub. So it was 31 children. And while trying to maintain behaviour management and all that kind of stuff. So I was finding it really overwhelming. So you're talking, went back at the beginning of September. This was end of September. So I'd probably done, this was probably about 4 Fridays I'd done. And I thought, okay, something needs to change about this. I'm not going to keep doing this every Friday morning. And so there was one day where there was that. And then, you know, the children came in after break and we did maths and everything. But I knew that I was having my PPA that afternoon. We were allowed to go home for PPA. And I knew I was going to have to get home and just completely decompress, de-escalate, because it was just so overwhelming. So normally I'd kind of go at lunch and say, like, I'm going to have my PPA at home. But something had happened. A couple of the children were kind of butting heads, and I knew that it was going to be a very fizzy lunchtime. So I thought, I'm going to hang around. And it was, as I predicted. So I spent my lunchtime kind of coaching one of them through, like, you know, his kind of like anger management sort of stuff and having a word with the other child, all the while on the edge of tears myself, just thinking, I don't know how much longer I can do this. And so when all that was sorted, I grabbed my stuff and I said, I'm going. And I think maybe the head had said, oh, can I just grab your foot? And I said, I just really need to leave. And so I left, signed out, made sure the admin staff knew, got home and thought, right, I need to let them know what's going on. When I'd gone back in the September, I'd already contacted Access to Work. My sister is a treasure trove of information about this stuff. So she said, you know, contact Access to Work, because any adjustments that you need on top of what your employer can provide, they can pay for. And she was diagnosed autistic. And so she'd got a few bits of bob. Well, I say bits of bob. She'd done pretty well out of Access to Work. So I'd already contacted them because I thought, well, it takes about 12 weeks for them to even look at your form. So I may as well get it in now. And it doesn't have to go through the employer or occupational health. You can just do it yourself. So in this email, I'd got home and I'd said, look, I'm finding Friday mornings really, really overwhelming. I've already contacted Access to Work about changes that can be made for my ADHD. But in the meantime, I need something to change. I need something. And I said, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the weekend to think about it. I'm going to do next week and just figure out what exactly it is that's making me feel like this. And I had an email back from the executive head saying, thank you so much for your email. Yeah, of course, we want to support you. So yeah, I'll when I'm in next week, we'll have a chat about it. And I was quite happy with that. So I spent that weekend kind of thinking, right, think about mental health, spend time with the family, in nature, go for walks, you know, have some nice food. Went in on the Monday thinking, right, you know, your feelings are valid. You're not making this up. You know that you're entitled to help. So let's get in and let's just remember who the hell we are. So went in on the Monday morning, probably about 7:30. Hadn't even poured a coffee. And the head came in and said, can I just grab you for 2 minutes? And I was like, yep, sure, no worries. And he asked me about the email. And he hadn't replied to the email, but he said, the executive head's going to want to talk to you about this when he's in tomorrow. And I was like, yeah, I know, that's fine. And it started off as almost like I sent the email. Yeah, that's okay. And it slowly turned into this kind of, well, why have you contacted Access to Work? And like, what is it that you need changing? Well, why do you get that change and nobody else does? And I was just thinking, I've literally just walked in. Like, that the last time, that the last time I was in here, I was overwhelmed because I emailed you. So why now when I'm coming in on a Monday morning, are you doing this to me? And it was almost like the attitude about being diagnosed was always, when I'd first gone in and said I was diagnosed, and I said, so I probably need some adjustments. And they said, well, well, the head said, well, that's going to go on your record. We're going to have to get occupational health involved. And I was like, yeah, that's okay. I don't mind. I've got nothing to be ashamed of. And it was also, that's going to go on your record. That's nothing. I'm not scared of that. That's who I am.
Could you imagine? Could you imagine, Hollie? Yeah. So you've got a disability, and you're telling me now we need to make adjustments. So you're going to need a ramp into your room because you're a wheelchair user. Good. That's going to have to go on your record, don't you?
Yeah, just why would it was the connotations of that were so negative. And I remember just going, I've got nothing to be ashamed of. I don't mind.
But you also explained it beautifully to him, which was, actually, this doesn't make me special. This brings me up to the level playing field of everybody else.
And this is the thing about, so when I started on that Monday morning, when I started saying off the top of my head, it's the lights, it's the screens, and it's the Friday morning. The first thing that he came back with was, right, well, I need you to give me some more detail because it's not as easy as that. I've got to make sure there's parity across all the staff. And I was like, reasonable adjustments isn't about parity for everyone. It's about giving me parity with everybody else by making accommodations so that I am equal with everybody else, because I can't access everything the same way as they can. So it was all, and then he would say, well, what's access to work? And I was thinking, well, you're my manager. And I sent that email on Friday, so you could have just Googled it over the weekend or even Monday morning. You could have just Googled it and known what it was. So then I had to explain to him what access to work was. And then he asked me if it was a behaviour issue. And I said, well, it's not a behaviour issue, but they're obviously, they're not an easy class. And after I'd sort of listed all this stuff off, so he was saying, right, so it's the lights. And I was saying, it's not just the lights. And then he was saying, right, so it's the screens. And I was saying, no, it's not just. And it was like, there's nothing I can hang my hat on and tell you it's this one thing. So I said, it's a combination of things. And I kept having to say to him, no, it's not just that. It's a combination of things.
Brief interlude, dear listener. Couple of questions. Are you a tutor or even a pit pony considering tutoring? And do you fancy getting in the room with myself and Sarah Dunwood learning about the wonderful world of tuition? Then why not join us at the National Tutors Conference hosted by Connexus Tuition on the 29th of July 2025. It's at Chesford Grange, Kenilworth. Links to the tickets are in the show notes below, and we will both see you on the other side. And where was this conversation taking place?
In his office, in the head's office.
Okay, so he brought you into the office. But it really doesn't seem as though this is a framing conversation that is coming from a supported point of view. You've given some quick wins there, Hollie. You have given some basic quick wins. Lighting, screens, and accommodation on a Friday morning. Mm-hmm. That is a really quick win in the first instance. It's not like you've come in with anything unreasonable, because they were, by definition, reasonable adjustments.
Yeah.
So he then throws into the mixer behaviour of your class.
Yeah, which had always been a bit of a thing, because I mean, it sounds horrible to say, but if there's a difficult class, when they're moving through the school, they're coming to you, and there's always one cohort in the school, and it's going to happen forever and ever. It's always going to be the way. And it was my turn with them, but I'd made a lot of effort with the class. I'm always really open about my ADHD. I was open with parents. There was a boy in that class with ADHD. I went out on the playground, spent some time with his mum. And I've always found that my way of behaviour management is never popular with SLT. So I don't shout. It takes a lot. Like if I'm going to shout, it's more of a very raised voice. And because I'll control my voice, as soon as it rises, I don't need to shout because and I was that teacher. It's just like, well, I heard her voice go high, and she never gets angry. But it was almost like I wanted the classroom to be a safe space where we felt like a team. So I'd be able to say, okay, so, you've gone and done this. At break time, I'm going to come outside. I want you to talk to me about it. I want you to talk to me about where that came from, where that behaviour came from, why are you feeling like that? And then let's get the other child in, like, what's going on? And almost like that restorative kind of practice of and solutions focused, and not because behaviour is communication. There's a need behind whatever's happening. So I was always trying to do it like that. And I'd said to the head, I'd said, give me a term with them. I said, give me half a term doing it my way. And then if that's not worked, if you think I'm not doing a very good job, I'll do it your way. There was a sort of behaviour policy in place where you'd get sort of like, you were on green if you did something good, you got a green card, and then there'd be red cards or yellow cards. And if you got a yellow card for break time that day or the day after, if it was after break time, you would have to put on a high-vis vest at break time and walk the perimeter of the playground, because the head thought, well, they're still outside, they're still getting movement, but they can't join in with anything. And then the teacher who was on duty, their job would be to have the red book and to be checking in with the children, saying, why are you here? What are you going to change about next time? And try and have those conversations. And if you got a red card, you would do that for break and lunch. So you'd do that for 2 different breaks. And I hated that setup. So I never gave out red cards. It was just, I just couldn't bear the thought of the child doing that. So I would try and get behind the behaviour and what happened and say, and I would even say to my class, I don't give out red cards, but what I do expect is a conversation for you to be honest with me. So it was always a little bit of a bit of a rub with SLT that they didn't think I was sort of using the right sanctions. But it's proven that typical behaviour policies don't work with neurodivergent children, because their behaviour is a different kind of communication. They're communicating a need, a sensory need that's not been met. And often they're too young to know what that need is. And so it's going to come out in an unexpected way. So, for example, gorgeous little boy. Honestly, I've made friends with his mum since I've left. Like, he's just gorge. And so I would let him have little adjustments, like, he could doodle while I was doing the teaching or while we were reading the class text, as long as he was listening. So I'd be reading and I'd say, boy's name, what did I just read? And he'd be able to parrot it back to me. So he was listening and I could check that he was listening. But then you get the head teacher or the executive head teacher come in. Why are you drawing? You should be listening. And I'd be like, he is listening. This is how he listens. And it was just this atmosphere all the time that I was doing something wrong, when really my class and me were just trying to understand each other and understand how each other ticks. And it takes a while. It takes a while for that to happen, for them to trust you and you to trust them and to establish those boundaries. So I was constantly being told, you've got to get them under the thumb. You've got to give out a few red cards. You've got to shout a little bit. And I was always saying, I'm not doing that. I've told you, give me half a term of doing it my way. And I was getting feedback from parents just like, oh, they're really happy. They're happy to come into school. Like, they skip into school now and they didn't before. So I was getting really lovely feedback. And to me, the children are happy, the parents are happy, then I'm doing it right. However that looks to management, I'm doing it right. And I started teaching in 2008, where it was like, here's your class, here are the objectives. However you get them there, that's down to your professional judgment. Whereas now it's, here's your class, here's the objectives, and here's how you've got to do it. And I just can't work like that, because there's teaching and people, it's one big grey area. There's no formula for doing it. Everything is a grey area. And what works one day might not work the next day. So all I wanted was a bit of professional trust to do what I do best.
And let's face it, Hollie, it's the signalling's not coming through. For me, Sarah, I don't know if you agree. I think where the problem came at this stage in Hollie's journey is her diagnosis is new to her, but she's scrambling and researching and finding out everything she can, trialing and testing and working out to see what makes her tick and make it right. But the school, not only did they come at it from a point of view, I don't understand what this is. I think it was one step beyond that. I think I do understand what this is, and I've made my judgment about what you're bringing to me. And therefore, we're going to approach this nonsense in the way you're presenting it. What are your thoughts, Sarah, about Hollie's journey so far?
I'm going to use the word inconvenient. That's the word. And you know I love the bones of you, Hollie, but Hollie, you presented a number of inconveniences that they weren't prepared to flex or even acknowledge in the right way. Your diagnosis is an inconvenience. Putting a cover over the lights is an inconvenience. Putting something on a screen is your style and approach is an inconvenience. It's wrong. And I go back to, and I've said it so many times in this podcast, if a child had those reasonable adjustments on their EHCP, they would be done without question. Oh, that child needs an Erlen screen over their monitor. No problem. Class teacher needs to change the background colour on the whiteboard to accommodate the one child to make it accessible. No problem. And I just cannot understand why adults who are managers in your circumstances, in order to avoid me generalising, could not see that was exactly the same situation.
And to have to fight for it and sit there and explain. And on that morning, so there was all this kind of background with the behaviour management, which I know, I've been teaching for 16 years. I know what I'm doing. It's not my first go round. And he'd said, when I said, about there's all these admin tasks, and he said, well, why don't you just do it how everyone else does it? And I was like, well, that's really ableist. I can't do it how everyone else does it because my brain doesn't work like everybody else's. And I said, because I have a disability and I'm entitled to have adjustments made. And he was like, well, what do you mean a disability? You mean ADHD? And I said, yes, legally, I have a disability and I'm entitled to adjustments because I'm protected. It's a protected characteristic under the Equality Act. So he then said, he was like, right, okay, so, we've got this. And he listed off what I'd said. And I was like, yep. And then he said, if there's one thing that we can do to support you right now, it would be with, the behaviour management stuff. And I went, okay, that's fine. If that's what you want to take first, more than happy to accept support. Because I thought, go on then. You come into my class then and you show me how you would do it. So I was like, yeah, that's fine. And then he took a pause and he was like, right, okay. Do you think you're being too nice? And I just went, don't do that. Don't put it on me. And I was just, because I hate that understanding children and embracing what their needs and making adjustments for them and not shouting at them, not making them walk the perimeter of the playground, but wanting to have a restorative conversation with them, that's considered too nice. And so I just went, don't do that. Don't. I was like, do not put it on me. I felt in that moment, I felt gaslit. I felt like someone was saying, all of this is you basically saying that you can't cope with that class. and you're being too nice. I mean, my kind of like pin-up teacher has always been Miss Honey. That, to me, that is always the teacher that I aim to be. That teacher that sees you. And, you know, I've got cards from my previous class that said, like, I feel comfortable. I feel safe in your class. I feel like I've been able to come out of my shell in my own time. And, you know, you're talking year fives, like these gorgeous children just saying, you know, one of them said, thank you for understanding that sometimes I just need some time on my own. Like, imagine, you think of your own children going into a class where a teacher just understands that if you need to take yourself off, we had a little calm down corner, which was never very popular, little calm down corner. Take yourself off in there. That's okay. It's all right. I know that you'll catch up when you get back out. Go and have 5 minutes. But then I'd have the head teacher or the executive head come in and say, what are you doing in there? You were fine at lunchtime. Out there, do your work. And it was like, they may have been looking fine at lunchtime. That was 10 minutes ago. Maybe now they're not fine. And it was just this constant walk in and judgment straight away. No trust at all. And so when he said that, I felt my anxiety, like the panic attack rising, the lightheadedness. And I looked at my hands and my hands were shaking. And I was like, it's happening again. It's happening now. And I was showing him my hands. And he started going, oh, I can't say anything to you without you getting all worked up. I'm trying to help here. And I was just going, I was like, look, I did a really good job with the boy who was in my class last year, who was almost on a permanent exclusion. And he didn't go in the end because he was in my class and I took time with him. I said, I did a fucking good job with him and I'm doing a good job in this class as well. And I was like, and I was stood up by that point and my voice was raised and I was basically saying, how dare you put this on me? And it was only me and him. I think there's probably some Key Stage 1 teachers who were sort of the other side of the building. And then, yeah, with this whole, oh, I can't say anything, can I? I can't say anything without you getting all worked up. Like, I'm trying to help you. And I was just saying, well, this isn't helping. This isn't helping at all. And I'm leaving this. I'm leaving this meeting before I say something I regret. So I walked out, went back into the staff room to get my coffee, which I hadn't even taken a sip of yet. The site manager, caretaker, was in there and he was just like, you all right? And I was like, yeah, fine. Because this is the thing, people weren't used to seeing me like that or hearing me like that. I was the person that would go in there in the morning and write like a positive affirmation on the staff notice board and stuff because I want, and asking people how they are because I want people to feel good at work. I want them to feel understood. So I went back to my classroom and got straight on the phone to my husband, Rich. We'd only just been married then. And he was like, it had turned from panic attack feeling to just floods of tears and I could hardly get my words out. And he was like, right, come home. He was like, pack up your stuff, come home. You're not staying at work like that. So I got my stuff, tried to find the head again. He wasn't in his office. Tried to phone him, but his phone was on the desk. Tried to phone the executive head with 2 different numbers that I've got. He wasn't picking up because he was at the other school in the trust. And I just thought, I've got to get out of here. Walked into the car park and the reception teacher was there. And she was just like, oh my God, are you all right? And I said, I could just about get out. I just need to go home. She must have thought that there'd been some kind of like family tragedy or something like that from the way that I was acting. And she was like, get in your car, go home, drive safely. I will make sure everyone knows that you're gone. And she gave me a massive hug. And I drove home and I got straight on the phone to my sister. And she was like, I want you to get home. I want you to phone the doctor. I want you to self-cert for a week. And then I want you to get signed off because you are not psychologically safe in that space. So she's a manager in the NHS. And she was just like, no, that's not what we do. So she was like, this is what you can do. So I got home, phoned the doctor, sent them an email saying I'm self-certing for this week, but I have made an appointment at the doctor. And I will speak to you when I'm ready. executive head then emails back and says, I'll phone you tomorrow. And I said, no, you won't phone me tomorrow. When I'm ready, I'll let you know. And it was always a term, well, my duty of care of blah, 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 blah. And I was thinking, oh, now we've got a duty of care, have we? I think he was probably quite disappointed that the head of school had spoken to me before he had chance to, because the executive head is very by the book. So he was like, next time I see you, we'll chat about it. We'll get everything sorted for you. And I think someone's got in there first and not dealt with it correctly.
What I'm hearing, Hollie, is something's happened in your journey. You've had a diagnosis or an awareness, because asking for reasonable adjustments, you don't need a diagnosis, I'm right in thinking. So you've gone in and you've decided to take yourself out of the shadows, so to speak, and bring to your management, your head teacher's attention, what you need in order to make you operate as a teacher. They're not unreasonable. But at every point, your boundaries have been tested. An element, you use the word yourself, gaslighting. Now, we know you. We were at that wedding. One of the best weddings ever. I can still remember parts of it. And I know you. Imagine if you're not you and your boundaries are not held the way in which you would know. You won't be phoning me tomorrow. You've reaffirmed and you've held your boundaries because you are in a better place. You have got self-worth. It must be awful for people who would just fold at the first hurdle where that's concerned. And I'm sure there's many of them. And, we'll come on to talk about the work you do afterwards. Sarah, any thoughts at this point about bringing to the attention of your employer or your workplace your needs?
I haven't got direct experience of it, but I have got direct experience of the point in time where things started to go awry for me, and I, like Hollie, had some boundaries and push back. Well, no, you're saying this, and this about me, but you had a responsibility here and you didn't do this, and this. And it was the minute I started pushing back that it escalated quickly, to put it like that. And over a course of a few days. So although different circumstances, there are parallels. I think there's something for me about, and I am going to generalize, that schools think that employment legislation and certain laws and things like that, if it's too inconvenient for them to do it in a school environment, then they're not going to do it. Flexible working, reasonable adjustments, this, that, and the other. And I think it's compounded by the fact that so many of us do not know what our legal and contractual rights are.
Hello, loyal listeners. I'm going to go full on Charles Dickens in this buy us a coffee slot. And as Oliver Twist, we're going to ask for a little bit more. Any pennies you can donate to keep our podcast funded would be greatly appreciated. See the buy us a coffee link in the episode notes. Thank you.
And our responsibilities, but what our rights are.
I wish it was a lecture at uni. And I think I'm seeing it time and time again across schools, with my new job and obviously the support group and stuff, that neurodivergent people, adults, children, everyone, to even know what you need is the first step. Nobody asks you. Nobody sort of says, how can I support you? What works for you? What doesn't work for you? Until I started my new job, no one had ever asked me that before. And when my manager asked me, I didn't know how to answer. I just thought, I don't really know. You know, if you're neurodivergent, your self-diagnosis of that is valid. You don't have to think, oh, well, I won't get help unless I've got a diagnosis. You know, we'd all be waiting for years and years and years. But it's that, like you say, it's just knowing what you're entitled to. So if it hadn't have been for my sister, who, I mean, I don't know what kind of training she got for her management role in the NHS, but she was saying to me, you know, if they want a wellbeing call, you decide when you're ready for that. And it doesn't have to be your manager. It can be anyone from work. It could be a friend from work who checks into you, because that's for your well-being. And she said, email back and say, you are allowed to phone me on Friday of next week, which would have given me, you know, say 10 days. And that's when I will talk to you. I will expect a call from you on Friday next week at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock or whatever. And she said, and they will not be allowed to contact you until then, unless you need to send them like your fit note or whatever. And if it hadn't have been for her knowing that, I would have been on the phone to management the next day, probably in another state of panic, because that's kind of then what started to happen. Anything to do with school would raise this response in me. And I was like a different person. And it got to a point where, because I actually got back before my husband had dropped my daughter at school, and I was just in such a mess, she then went to school, made me a present because she was in reception, and the teachers were saying, oh, what have you made? And she said, I've made a present with mummy because the naughty man at school made her cry. And she brought it home for me. And obviously her teachers knew I was a teacher. So, and I just thought, she's only 5 and she already knows actually what's just happened with mummy. And mummy should never, ever have to feel like that. And I said to her, don't you worry, mummy, no one's ever going to treat mummy like this again. And I just thought, like, it was just bizarre, like for me. And like, you know me, I'm positive and I optimistic, and I like to think the best of people. I like to sort of work towards something, feel like I'm progressing. I like to put time into people. So for me to be like that, I now cannot put myself back in that state of mind because it's so foreign to me. So to actually get to that point where I was almost broken, and I just thought, I've forgotten who I am.
And almost broken. So soon in. Change my lights, change my board, and let me do your bloody nonsense of your bullshit on a Friday morning in a different room. How hard was that to do, unless what sat behind it was, where's Hollie's certificates? I've just walked past her classroom again and it's bloody chaos. It's chaos. There's kids in teepees and wigwams and she's put fairy light, what? And sitting behind that was actually, they didn't want you. So it wasn't just an inconvenience, an unnecessary inconvenience, as Sarah's saying. It could have actually been an opportunity to bring somebody in who thinks walking the Green Mile at lunchtime with kids, right, is the best thing ever, okay? Because I'll tell you something. I would not send my kid to a school that said that was the behaviour management policy. Because we've been teaching since the 90s, and I don't think schools have adopted that kind of. And so you clearly look at how that school's set up, Hol. And the irony is, it's the second time you'd been in. So they knew what they were getting. It's not like they wanted a Miss Trunchbull and Miss Honey turned up. So I don't think it's just about the ignorance of, and I mean, I'm not speaking on behalf of what happened, so please, this is just me surmising. But it was almost like, here we go again with her.
Yeah, and you know, I've noticed that's a theme from listening to the podcast episodes. I think it was it Leanne who was the creative, she does the voiceover and stuff now. She said that whenever you stick your head up and you say, that's not right, or those bloody water bottles, or well, and whenever you sort of go in and go, actually, do you know what? That doesn't have to work like that. It could work like this. So when you get a new teacher in, you get like fresh blood, fresh pair of eyes, and who can kind of like zoom into what making things more efficient or whatever. And I was always that teacher who would say, no, you've observed me twice this term, you're not observing me again. Or I don't work a Friday, so I will not be checking my email. So I didn't know that this was happening on Monday or whatever. So I was always and that's a neurodivergent thing as well. Justice sensitivity. You know what's right, you know what's wrong, and you're willing to say that's not right. When it was in that meeting with the head, I was made sure I said that's ableism. You're not allowed to say that to me. There's been times where I've been in an interview abroad, and in the interview they said, well, who's going to look after your kids while you work? And I just went, you're not allowed to ask me that. And I was just thinking, well, obviously I'm not getting this job, but I want you to know. And the thing is, why people who know their rights in the workplace, if management are afraid of them, it's because they don't want to do things properly. Now, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like, surely the training that you get should include access to work, how to support your staff, well-being. But it doesn't they just seem to just promote whoever's been there the longest.
People who benefit from you not having boundaries are never going to support you by putting a boundary in place. And that's what this is about. This is about understanding this world of how people work differently. And going back to Leanne Herring and her episode, you reflected on that with me over a couple of voice notes, Hollie, and you said, what was it you came to in that moment of realization about embracing different ways of working and that kind of thing?
Well, that's the whole point of neurodiversity. The lady, she's called Judy Singer, the lady that coined the term neurodiversity was based on biodiversity and how all the different species that work together, we watch like David Attenborough and stuff, we talk about how because that does that then can live like that, and it all kind of works. And we embrace that. We realize there has to be different ways of working to sort of sustain evolution. But we don't think about that with our brains. So in a workplace, if you end up with if you think about the interview process, if you're not going to make adjustments for people, which actually you have to do, make adjustments for people if they need an adjustment or if they have a disability, you then end up with people, employing people or interviewing people that are all working in a certain way. If you then end up filling your SLT with those people, filling your staff with those people, you're never getting any other thought patterns, any other ways of working in there. And you have to embrace all these different ways that people work. Even when like the completer finisher, the ideas person, that's where that's coming from. That's how you make a success of things. And if you embrace that, this is the way Hollie works, that's what she does, that's the way that teacher works, that's what she does, and he's over there doing that, and just then imagine then getting into a meeting thinking, right, how are we going to move forward with this policy or this thing that we're stuck on? You've got all these different brains, all these different ideas coming through. Great. And then you can embrace that. But it's almost like this cookie cutter situation where if you don't do it like they do it, then you're out.
Yeah, but then the peak irony is you're stood in front of a class with all these different ways of thinking, all these different ways of doing, but you're expected to accommodate all of that. We're really clued up on that and how we can work with this child and make an adjustment for that child. And now we've got all these different things going on for the kids. but not the staff. Sarah, what are your thoughts on it? Because I'd just be interested to see what your thinking is of what Hollie's talking about at the moment.
A team doesn't work unless you've got different people in it. And you and I are the classic example of that. You and I are the classic example of that. I am a completer finisher, and you are ideas and the vision and the cut into. You're the listener. You hear the really critical bit in something, and then you go, I think we need to do this, this, and this. And I go, fine, I'll make it happen. You cannot have it. If we had a team when me and you were exactly the same, nothing would ever get done. And fundamentally, I think Hollie's bang on the mark here, and it does go right the way back to the interview process. You apply for a job, you can say what adjustments you might need, but then there's a fear about doing that in case by saying it, that then means that you don't get an interview. And there's some really good practice going on in the world of business with interview questions being provided before the interview so that you can prepare and it's not a blindside, because people are genuinely terrified about answering a question on the spot. And it's not because they don't know the answer, it's because of the kind of fight or flight or freeze thing, isn't it? So there is great practice out there, but it's not consistent practice. And I think there's a degree of lip service by, tell us what your reasonable adjustments are, blah, 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 because they have to, not because it's the right thing to do. And I think that's the difference. Have to, or doing it because it's the right thing to do.
I think what else is important, and I keep going back to, you were having a conversation in ignorance. In our head office team, when we were realising that Sarah, for example, with her neurodivergent, and some of our other team members, guess what I did? I went down a rabbit hole to understand. I listened to Sarah, who was going down her own rabbit hole. Educate me on what this means. And I remember being sat in the office, or it might have been outside or something, and she took a piece of paper, and as if I was 4 years old, she started drawing how the brain worked to give me the example. We started with the basics of what is neurotypical, what is neurodivergent, within that there can be different. And she walked me through, because I had a thirst and a quest to learn. Because in order to step into somebody's world, and it gave me loads of information about myself, stuff that still comes through all the time. But we started on this journey together to really understand and pad our way through. You were instrumental to us, Hollie. You know you were. And also what you've then got to realise is, yes, this happens within the workplace. Yes, the employer or the line manager seeks to understand what's happening. But at the same time, forget Sarah's position as COO, forget everything that she does in the business. There was a 50-something woman, or 40, late 40, early 40s, Sarah, 50, a year-old friend who was almost going through this emotional realization. And that was a real journey for Sarah. This is why this happened. A grief, an anger, a real acceptance of that realization of this is what's happened. So when you've got the cornerstone of your business going through this whole awakening process, the last thing she'd want me to say is, so, right, what is it? You need earphones? Is that what you're saying? You can't have our top wall in front of you because it's going to distract you. Well, why? Because what she was going through and processing would have finished her off if she'd have been met with that.
Yeah. Because it's about trying to understand yourself.
Yes.
You then have to try and explain that to someone whose tone is judgmental. And once you start looking into all this stuff, the way they diagnose is using the DSM-5. They're trying to kind of change it so it's more of a UK-based one, because the DSM-5 is American. But it's all deficit-based because it's made by neurotypical people based on how much of an inconvenience you are to them. And it's also, all the research is based on white boys. So that's why if you're female, your autism might present in a different way. Or if you're a female who's going down the pathway for ADHD, you often don't get diagnosed as hyperactive, because for females, the hyperactivity is in their head. It's in the way they talk. It's in the way they process. So already, if you start looking into, am I autistic? Do I have ADHD? You're already faced with everything you can't do. And then if you get a diagnosis and you're thrown into the world and then you ask for help and then you're judged for that, you will always think everything is your fault. And that's a neurodivergent thing as well. And one of the biggest misconceptions of autistic people is that they can't have empathy. But they have too much empathy. They're masking to make you feel comfortable. They're even the other day I was talking to a teacher, and she said that one of the children had been refused a diagnosis because the consultant paediatrician said he can't be autistic because he's making eye contact. It's like, it doesn't work like that. If you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. You've met one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD. So I could walk into that office and say, this is overwhelming, this is overwhelming, this is overwhelming. And then someone else with ADHD could come in and just say, oh, that's all fine for me. It doesn't negate what the other person feels. And that's when it becomes psychologically unsafe. You're not supported in that workplace and you are disabled. And it's almost like it's seen as like popular now, when actually the rate of neurodivergence has always been here and the diagnosis rate has always been here. And now we're just catching up. So yeah, it does seem like it's popular, but actually we're just catching up to what the rate actually is. So that's why we've got access to so much more material now that we can really reflect on ourselves. And it's not a popular thing. Nobody wants it. I don't want to have to take amphetamine in the morning just to be a person. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's the whole neurodivergent life is just full of shame. Shame, I didn't do this. And I'm constantly speaking negatively to myself. And my husband will be like, that's my wife you're talking about. And then I'm like, pulls me up for it. And I'm like, oh gosh, sorry, yeah, I shouldn't. And in front of, he's an angel, isn't he? He's an angel.
That concludes the end of part 1 with Hollie. Please tune in on our next episode, which will follow, for part 2. Thank you.